On the 29th of August 1978, three men met for lunch in the Belgravia restaurant La Poule au Pot. They were best-selling spy novelist John le Carré, legendary actor of stage and screen Sir Alec Guinness, and recently retired director of MI6 Sir Maurice Oldfield. Earlier that year, Guinness had agreed to play the leading role of spymaster George Smiley in the BBC adaptation of le Carré's Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, due to commence filming that October. Uncertain how to portray a seasoned intelligence officer, Guinness had asked le Carré for advice, prompting the author to set up the meeting with Oldfield, a small, tubby man who bore a certain physical resemblance to how Smiley is described in le Carré's novels. Throughout the lunch, Guinness studied Oldfield's body language, mannerisms and clothing for inspiration, even watching how the old spy chief swung his umbrella as he departed. The following day, Guinness recorded in his diary how le Carré had taken him to meet Sir Maurice Oldfield, on whom he based much of Smiley. This was in fact a misunderstanding, for Smiley's debut in the 1961 novella Call for the Dead had predated le Carré's first encounter with Oldfield. Nonetheless, the actor would partially model his performance on Oldfield, and when the serial commenced transmission the following year, he recounted a lunch with, quote, the real Smiley, unquote, in an interview with The Guardian. Thus, a myth that Oldfield had been the original inspiration for Smiley was forged, which le Carré would be denying for many years to come. For aficionados of le Carré, this is a very familiar anecdote. Bringing together titans of popular literature, acting and spycraft, it is a quintessential piece of le Carré gossip. It can be found in, amongst other places, Piers Paul Reed's authorised biography of Guinness, Adam Seisman's authorised biography of le Carré, le Carré's own memoirs The Pigeon Tunnel, and Martin Pierce's authorised biography of Oldfield. In the case of Reed and Seisman's books, this story comes in the context of more extensive accounts of the production of Tinker Tailor, where a range of similarly colourful anecdotal material is mixed in with more serious archival research. Now, I first came across the Oldfield lunch story whilst researching for my PhD thesis on television spy dramas in the early 2010s, for which Tinker Tailor was one of my major case studies. Indeed, it swiftly became apparent that the production of Tinker Tailor has been mythologized through anecdote far more than typical for television drama of the era, precisely because of the involvement of le Carré and Guinness, two outsiders to the world of British television who command considerable star status and biographical interest of their own. Such material, however, posed me something of a quandary. On the one hand, with my interest in researching the serial's production history, I was keen to find as much behind-the-scenes material as I could. But on the other hand, there seemed little I could do with a story such as the Oldfield lunch in academic terms. Such gossip, though undoubtedly useful for adding character to popular accounts and biographies, seemed something of a dead end for serious scholarly work. Better, I thought, to focus on researching co-production arrangements with Paramount Pictures and other such matters in the BBC written archives. My interest in such anecdotal material never entirely went away, however. And in the end, I came to realise what fascinated me about it was not so much the events described as the storytelling. And as I looked at the various iterations of the Oldfield lunch story and other Tinker Tailor anecdotes, I came to realise that much of what I knew about these events had essentially just one source, John le Carré. These accounts consistently quote interviews with the author, whether original or second-hand, his skills as a raconteur adding considerable colour for a popular audience. Now, sometimes the details can be cross-referenced, in the case of the Oldfield lunch, with Piers Paul Reed's account, where le Carré's reminiscences are situated alongside excerpts from Guinness's unpublished personal diaries. Indeed, it is from Guinness via Reed that I have managed to establish the precise date and location of the Oldfield lunch, details usually left unspecified in le Carré's telling of the tale. But the most memorable features of the Oldfield lunch, in which Guinness is said to have analysed Oldfield so intently and obsessively to the point of following him out of the restaurant, does not appear in Guinness's diary. That interpretation of the story is purely a product of le Carré's telling. Thus, whilst Guinness might once have corrupted public understanding of Oldfield's relationship with Smiley, over subsequent years, the power of curating the Oldfield lunch story has been claimed back by le Carré. Through such tellings, le Carré has helped to construct a particular vision of Guinness. On the one hand, this is framed as awe at the legendary actor's technique and extreme capacity for identification. On the other hand, amusement is generated from the eccentricities of Guinness's over-immersion. Guinness, for instance, is said to have wondered whether Oldfield's peculiar way of handling his wine glass amounted to looking for the dregs of poison. We can see this dichotomy at work in another story often told about Guinness's preparation for the role of Smiley in 1978. In early June, Guinness and his wife Merilla checked into the Lamorna Cove Hotel on the coast of Cornwall, close to Le Carre's Cornish home of Tregifion. On arrival, Le Carre delivered the first 3 draft scripts of Tinker Tailor, and Guinness spent the next few days meeting Le Carre for lunch and supper, his diary of the 5th of June recording discussion over a champagne in our treetop sitting room, followed by an indifferent meal. Although Guinness's diary allows us to verify the trip and establish dates, for the best-known part of the story, we must again turn to Le Carre's anecdotes. For the second stage of the holiday, Guinness is said to have borrowed Tregifion from Le Carre. This stay was originally planned to last a fortnight, but the actor was spooked into an early departure, first by a mysterious phone call from the British ambassador in Bonn, and then by an encounter with Le Carre's neighbour and fellow author Derek Tanguy, who jokingly suggested that the house was bugged. Like the Oldfield story, this anecdote is compelling on multiple levels, offering a surface level of comedy concerning Guinness's dysfunctional obsessiveness and obliviousness, but a deeper fascination with the actor's capacity for, as Le Carre later put it, thinking himself into the part, stoking the paranoia in himself, and beginning to interpret the whole of life in terms of intrigue. One way of looking at this is that Le Carre has, through his reminiscence, effectively constructed Guinness as a character not unlike George Smiley himself, whose profile the author once distilled succinctly as being so terribly expert in the conduct of his professional life and such a fumbler in the context of his private life. As for Le Carre's own position in these stories, the author has been inclined to stress certain affinities he felt with Guinness, noting similarities in how they took on personalities in the process of writing and acting. But Guinness was very much the senior partner in this partnership, 17 years older, and with a more established cultural standing at this time. Le Carre's perspective is therefore one of looking up with awe at this enigmatic master of his field in action. Again, we can find a parallel with the fictional world of Tinker Tailor. Large portions of the novel are recounted through the perspective of Smiley's protege, Peter Gwilym, who assists his mentor in the mission to unmask a mole in the highest levels of the circus, Le Carre's fictionalized version of MI6. Gwilym, played by Michael Jason on screen, is a man of Le Carre's own generation. He looks up admiringly on that unrepeatable, fading circus generation of Smiley and his contemporaries, who still gave the service its dying flavour of adventure. This perspective is inescapably similar to Le Carre's own view on Guinness. Now, I want to finish by returning to the perspective I had on Tinker Tailor, coming to it as a television researcher interested in British broadcasting institutions. I found it striking how tales of the making of this landmark TV serial often ended up pushing the BBC itself to the margins. As we have seen, stories repeatedly centre on key preparatory work being conducted in fine dining establishments and Cornish hotels, with no BBC personnel present. This is, to say the least, not a particularly common situation on other espionage dramas that have featured in my research. A rare example of a popular account which privileges the role of the BBC in producing Tinker Tailor is Jean Seaton's authorised history of the corporation from 1974 to 1987. Seaton intriguingly situates her brief discussion of the serial not in the chapter on drama, but instead in the chapter focused on the relationship between the BBC and the secret state. This decision largely rests on an anecdote sourced from an interview with the serial's producer, Jonathan Powell. Director John Irvin, we are told, was worried about what Secret Service buildings looked like, asking whether he could get into any to see, only to be reassured by Le Carre that the dusty offices, the corridors, the elderly office furniture, and even the anxiously cranking lifts of MI6 felt like, looked like, and had some of the same kinds of people as the BBC. Indeed, a survey of the anecdotal material surrounding the production of Tinker Tailor throws up repeated contrasts between the drab offices and musty corridors of the BBC and the grandiose restaurants and Cornish hotels of Le Carre and Guinness's extracurricular adventures. This too mirrors a key aspect of the novel, which constantly contrasts the drab environments of the circus with such luminous elite spaces as prep schools, country houses, members' clubs, and the gleaming spires of Oxford, the habitat of that unrepeatable fading circus generation. And this contrast would prove key to the contemporary heritage aesthetic of the BBC serial. So perhaps in the end, the reason that the production of Tinker Tailor has proven such a rich source of anecdotal material for Le Carre is how it offers story elements not unlike those of a Le Carre novel, most obviously Tinker Tailor itself. The relationship between Le Carre and Guinness echoes that between Gwilym and Smiley. The narrative moves across a range of similar settings, and the BBC plays a role akin to the circus. Thus, whilst it might have been the BBC which adapted Tinker Tailor from page to screen, it was Le Carre himself who authored the final adaptation, from collaborative television production to the amusing fragments of a raconteur's anecdote.